The siren started at dawn. Captain Yara Singh was drinking her morning coffee in the command center of Vault Prometheus. When the first alarm cut through the silence like a knife, she dropped the cup. It shattered on the floor and she never thought about it again. She never thought about a lot of things again. After that morning, report, she said, and her voice was calm because it had to be. Around her, 200 officers scrambled to their stations. Screens flickered to life. Data poured in from satellites, from listening posts on the moon, from deep space sensors scattered across the solar system like scattered seeds. Lieutenant Oren Bakshi was the first to speak, and his voice was not calm at all. Captain, we are detecting 11,000 signatures dropping out of FTL at the edge of the system. Correction, 14,000. Hunter, correction, they are still arriving. Yara walked to the main display. The holographic map of the solar system floated in the center of the room, a beautiful blue marble at its heart. Earth home, and now spreading across the outer edges of the map like a disease. Thousands of red dots appeared, then thousands more, then so many that the computer stopped counting them individually and simply colored entire sections of space red. The Jokeri Dominion had come. Yara had known this day would come. Everyone in Vault Prometheus had known that was the whole point of the Vault. 3 years ago, when humanity first made contact with the galactic community, the joy had lasted exactly 11 days. On the 12th day, word of the Dominion Council, a gathering of 12 ancient alien species who had ruled this part of the galaxy for 50,000 years, had reviewed humanity's file and issued a single cold judgment. Species 4,217. Homo sapiens. Classification hazardous. Expansion rate dangerous. Recommended action complete elimination. The reason was simple and it was terrible. Humans grew too fast. They learned too quickly. They adapted too well. In just 10,000 years they had gone from caves to starships, and the elder species had taken millions of years to achieve the same. The Dominion looked at humanity and saw a species that would within a few centuries surpass them all, and the Dominion did not tolerate anything that threatened its power. Diplomacy had failed. Humanity had begged, argued, and pleaded before the Dominion Council. They had offered peace treaties, technology sharing, even voluntary limitations on their expansion. The Council had listened politely and then voted. The vote was unanimous. 12 species, 12 votes, 12 cold confirmations of death. That was when Vault Prometheus was activated deep beneath the Mariana Trench in a facility that had been secretly built over 2 decades by the United Governments of Earth. 200,000 people had been gathered, scientists, engineers, soldiers, doctors, teachers, artists, farmers, children. They were chosen not because they were the best or the brightest, but because they were a complete cross-section of humanity. Everything needed to rebuild a civilization from nothing. When and at the heart of the vault was Ember, the emergency neat biosphere for exodus and reconstruction, an artificial intelligence of extraordinary power. Ember had been designed for one purpose: to ensure that no matter what happened above, humanity would survive below. Now, as Yara watched the red dots fill the screen, she activated the final protocol. Ember, she said quietly. Begin exodus. The AI's voice filled the room. It was warm, almost human, and it carried a sadness that no machine Should have been able to feel Exodus. Protocol initiated, Captain. Estimated. Time to surface bombardment, 4 hours in. 17 minutes. All 36 siege ships are being prepared for launch. Cryogenic systems are online. I recommend we begin. Population transfer immediately. Ya. Nodded. She turned to her officers. Once. Some of them were crying, some of them were shaking, all of them were looking at her. You know what to do, she said. Move. The next 4 hours were the longest of Yara's life. 200,000 people had to be moved from the vaults living quarters into 36 siege ships, each one hidden in a separate launch bay carved into the rock beneath the ocean floor. Each ship was small, barely the size of a naval frigate, but packed with cryogenic pods, genetic samples, digital libraries containing every book ever written, every song ever recorded, every painting ever painted, the sum total of human civilization compressed into data and frozen flesh. The children went first. Yara stood at the entrance to Launch Bay 7 and watched as families were separated when parents kissed their children and placed them into the arms of cryotechnicians. Some children screamed, some were too young to understand. A little girl no more than 4 years old clutched a stuffed bear and asked her mother why she was crying. Because I love you so much, the mother said, and she smiled even as tears ran down her face. You are going on an adventure, my darling, the biggest adventure ever, and one day you will come home. She would not come home. Most of them would not come home. The sea ships could only carry 200,000 people. Earth's population was 7 billion. 7 billion people who would not fit in the ships. 7 billion people who would stay behind, above them on the surface. The world was trying to fight, you know. Every nation on Earth had put aside its differences in those final years and built a united defense fleet. 2,000 warships, the finest humanity had ever produced, rose to meet the Dominion Armada. They fought with everything they had. Pilots flew missions they knew were suicide. Captains rammed their ships into enemy vessels. Ground-based weapons fired until their barrels melted. It was not enough. It was never going to be enough. The Dominion fleet outnumbered humanity's by a factor of 50, and their technology was thousands of years more advanced. Human ships were destroyed by weapons they could not even detect. Shields that humanity thought were impenetrable were cut through like paper. The battle in orbit lasted 90 minutes. By the end, not a single human warship remained. Then the bombardment began. Yara watched it on the deep ocean sensors, and she felt something inside her break. Kinetic rods, tungsten pillars the size of skyscrapers, accelerated to a fraction of the speed of light, struck the surface. Each impact carried the energy of a nuclear weapon. They hit the cities first: New York, London, Tokyo, Beijing, Mumbai, Cairo, Sao Paulo, Moscow. One by one, the great cities of Earth were turned to dust and fire. Then came the antimatter warheads, and the cities were no longer dust. They were glass, molten, glowing glass that spread across the continents like burning rivers. The heat was so intense that the oceans nearest to the impact zones began to boil. Steam rose in columns so vast they could be seen from space. And finally the biodissolvers, a Dominion weapon designed specifically for organic life, a fine mist deployed from low-orbit drones that broke down living tissue at the molecular level. It drifted across the burning continents like a gentle rain, and everything it touched simply ceased to be. Trees, animals, people, a woman running with her child, an old man sitting in his garden watching the sky, a dog waiting by a door that would never open again. All of them dissolved, all of them gone. 7 billion lives ended in 6 hours. In the vault the screams had stopped. There was only silence now, the silence of people who had watched their entire world die and had no words left. Yara stood in the command center alone. Every officer had been loaded into the sea ship. She was the last. Ember had told her she needed to go, but she could not move. On the screen in front of her she could see a satellite image of Earth's surface. It was unrecognizable. The blue marble was gone. In its place was a ball of black and orange, cracked and burning, wrapped in a shroud of ash and steam. Captain Ember said gently, "It is time." "How many?" Yara whispered. "How many survived on the surface?" There was a pause. Ember did not want to answer. "My sensors indicate no remaining human life signs on the surface of Earth. Biodissolvers have been thorough." "Captain, I am sorry." Yara closed her eyes. She stood there for 10 seconds. In those 10 seconds, she allowed herself to feel everything. The grief, the rage, the helplessness, the horror. She let it wash through her like a wave, and then she opened her eyes and she put it all away in a box inside her chest, and she locked that box, and she knew she would carry it for the rest of her life. "Launch the ships," she said, and an Ember activated the launch sequence. Deep beneath the ocean floor, 36 bays open. Simultaneously, the seed ship's engines ignited, not with the roar of conventional thrust, but with the silent pulse of gravitic drives, technology that humanity had developed in secret and never shared with the galaxy. The ships rose through the water, through the boiling, churning ocean, and broke the surface into a sky choked with ash and fire. The Dominion fleet was still in orbit, scanning for survivors, but Ember had planned for this. The sea ships launched during the peak of the bombardment, when the electromagnetic noise from the impacts was so intense that no sensor could distinguish a small ship from the background radiation. The ship scattered in 36 different directions, in each one programmed with a unique course toward the outer rim of the galaxy, the empty, forgotten edge, where no elder species had ever gone, because there was nothing there worth taking. From a Dominion flagship in high orbit, a sensor officer noticed a brief anomaly, a flicker of unusual readings from the planet's ocean. He studied it for a moment, then dismissed it. The oceans were boiling after all. Strange readings were to be expected. He filed no report. He thought nothing of it. That small decision, that moment of laziness, that casual dismissal would cost the Dominion everything. High Arbiter Macharon, the supreme leader of the Dominion Council, watched the destruction of Earth from the observation deck of his flagship. He felt nothing. This was not the first species the Dominion had eliminated. It was not even the hunt, and it was simply maintenance, gardening as he liked to call it, pulling weeds before they could spread. He turned to his aide. "File the report. Species 4217. Homo sapiens. Status eliminated. Close the record." The aide bowed. "Yes, High Arbiter. Shall we leave a monitoring station in the system?" Macharon considered this for a moment, then shook his head. "No, there is nothing left to monitor. This system is dead. Let it be forgotten." He returned to his quarters. and slept well that night. He would sleep well for many nights to come. He would die of old age, comfortable and content, never knowing what was coming, never knowing that in the dark between the stars 36 tiny ships were carrying the seeds of his dominion's destruction. In the lead ship, Yara Singh sat in the pilot's chair and watched the stars. Ahead, behind her, in rows upon rows of cryogenic pods, her people slept, frozen, preserved, waiting. In the ship's cargo hold, sealed containers held soil samples from every continent. On Earth, genetic material from 10,000 species of plants and animals in a small vial of ocean water collected from the Pacific on the last day it existed. Ember's voice came through the speakers. Quiet and steady, course is set. Captain, destination, Outer Rim Sector 7742. Estimated travel time 47 years. Shall I prepare your cryogenic pod? Not yet, Yara said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a handful of dirt. She had scooped it from a planter in the vault's garden, the last garden on Earth, now buried under a kilometer of boiling ocean. She held it in her palm and looked at it. Just dirt, brown, ordinary dirt, but it was from Earth on my end. That made it the most precious substance in the universe. She closed her fist around it. Ember, she said, I want you to create a file, call it the Remembrance Protocol. I want every ship, every colony, every generation that comes after us to know what happened today. I want them to remember every city, every name, every face. I want them to remember the sound of the sirens and the color of the sky when it burned. I want them to remember the mother who told her daughter she was going on an adventure. I want them to remember all of it, every single detail, forever. Understood, Captain. And the purpose of this file? Yara stared at the stars. Her eyes were dry now. The tears were gone. What remained was something harder, something colder, something that would burn for 3,000 years, is so they never forget what was done to us, she said. And so they know exactly why we are coming back. Ember was quiet for a moment, then softly, shall I include a designation for the future action? Captain, for the records. Yara thought about it. She thought about the fire and the glass and the 7 billion voices silenced in a single afternoon. She thought about the little girl with the stuffed bear. She thought about the mother's smile. Call it the reckoning, she said. She placed the dirt carefully into a sealed container, labeled it with the date and the words Earth last day, and set it on the console beside her. Then she stood, walked to her cryogenic pod and lay down inside it. Wake me when we arrive, she said. The pod closed, the cold wrapped around her like a blanket, and as she drifted into the long sleep, the last thought in her mind was not of revenge. It was of a blue marble hanging in the black, the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, and the knowledge that it was gone, but not forever. Nothing was forever, not even death, not even for a species. The ship flew on into the dark. Behind it, Earth burned. The Dominion celebrated. The galaxy moved on and forgot that humans had ever existed, and in the silence between the stars, 36 ships carried the future, and the future was patient, and the future remembered everything. The first world they found was a nightmare. Kepler 9917 B sat at the very edge of the galaxy, a cold and angry rock orbiting a dim red star that barely deserved the name. The atmosphere was thin and full of carbon dioxide. West, the surface Temperature swung between -80 at night and a blistering 60 during the day. The soil was mostly iron dust and volcanic glass. Nothing grew there. Nothing had ever grown there. Nothing by any reasonable measure should ever try to live there. Captain Yara Singh looked at the scanner readings when Ember woke her from cryo-sleep 47 years after the fall of Earth, and she said 3 words that would define the next 3,000 years of human history. This will do. She was 71 years old now in biological terms, 47 of those years spent frozen, and she moved slower than she used to, but her mind was sharp and her will was iron. She called a meeting of the ship captains, 36 voices connected by encrypted quantum links across the vast distances between the scattered seed ships. Soon we have arrived at the edge. She told them, the places we have found are hard, they are ugly, they will try to kill us. That is exactly why we chose them. The Dominion does not come to places like these. There is nothing here they want, and that is our advantage. We will hide in the places no one wants. We will grow in the dirt no one values, and we will become something the galaxy has never seen. Not everyone agreed. Captain David Acapper of Sea Ship 12 argued that they should find better worlds, push a little closer to the galactic center, where conditions were kinder. Yara shut him down immediately. Kind worlds are watched worlds, she said. The Dominion monitors every habitable planet within 10,000 light-years of their borders. We go where they do not look, that we suffer now so our grandchildren can be strong. That became the first principle of what would later be called the Crucible Doctrine. Suffering was not something to be avoided, it was a tool. It was the fire that would forge humanity into something unbreakable. The colonization of Kepler 9917b, renamed New Dawn by its settlers, was brutal. The first year alone killed 1,100 people. The thin atmosphere meant that any breach in the habitat domes was fatal. Within minutes, the temperature swings cracked the concrete of their first buildings. The iron dust got into everything: lungs, machinery, food supplies. Children developed respiratory problems. Water had to be extracted from deep underground ice deposits using drills that broke constantly, but they survived. Humans had always been good at that. Ember coordinated everything. The AI ran the life support systems, managed the resource distribution, and most importantly, maintained contact between all 36 colony ships as they settled their own terrible worlds across the outer rim. Some found frozen moons. Others landed on worlds with crushing gravity or toxic atmospheres. One group settled inside a hollow asteroid, building their entire civilization in a spinning rock barely 20 km across. Every colony struggled. Every colony lost people, but not one colony failed. Yara Singh did not live to see the 2nd century. She died at the age of 103, sitting in a chair on the observation deck of the New Dawn colony, looking out through the dome at the red-brown landscape she had turned into a home. Her last words spoken to her granddaughter were simple: do not forget, I do not forgive, and do not stop building. Her granddaughter Meera Singh became the first leader of the Remembrance Council. The Remembrance Council was the governing body of what was now being called the Terran Regency, the scattered, hidden nation of humanity. It was not a democracy, not exactly. It was something more focused than that. The council had one founding law carved into the wall of every meeting hall on every colony world. We do not forget and we do not forgive. This was not about hatred, though hatred was certainly part of it. It was about purpose. The council understood that a scattered people living on harsh worlds at the edge of nowhere needed something to hold them together, something bigger than survival. And so the memory of Earth, the grief, the rage, and not the injustice, where it became the glue that bound humanity into a single focused civilization. Every year on the anniversary of Earth's destruction, every human colony observed the ash remembrance. It was a simple ceremony. Every person from the oldest elder to the youngest child would gather in the largest open space available. Each one would be given a pinch of earth, soil, real soil, carefully preserved and rationed from the original seed chip supplies. They would hold it in their hands, and together they would speak the words, we were, we are, we will be, and then they would place the soil into a sealed container to be preserved for the next generation. The soil was never used for planting, never wasted, never treated as anything less than sacred. It was the last physical connection to the world that was taken from them, and it was guarded with the same ferocity that other civilizations guarded their most powerful weapons. But remembrance alone would not save humanity. They needed to grow, they needed to change, and they needed to become something that the galaxy could not destroy a second time. The first great project was genetic reformation. It began in the 2nd century, led by Dr. Amara Oe, geneticist from C-Chip 23, who had settled on a world with radiation levels that would have killed unmodified humans. Within a decade, out of necessity, she developed techniques to rewrite the human genome, not to create something alien, but to push humanity to its theoretical limits. Over the following centuries, the changes spread across all the colony worlds. Human bones became 30% denser. Muscle fibers were restructured for greater efficiency. The immune system was enhanced to fight off diseases that didn't even exist yet. Cognitive processing speed increased. Reflexes sharpened and lifespans extended dramatically. A healthy human could now expect to live 300 years or more. But the most important change was invisible. Dr. Oe and her successors altered the human stress response. The old fight or flight mechanism was refined, sharpened, made more controllable. A modified human could experience extreme fear and still think clearly. They could endure pain that would incapacitate their ancestors and continue functioning. They could go without sleep for days and still make complex decisions. They were still human. They still laughed, cried, loved, and grieved. Why? They still wrote poetry and sang songs and held their children close. But they were harder, now tougher, built for a universe that had tried to kill them. The second great project was military. The Crucible doctrine, first spoken by Yara Singh, became the foundation of Terran society. It was not militarism in the old Earth sense. There were no dictators, no worship of violence, no glorification of war. It was something more practical than that. Every human trained for combat, not because they wanted to fight, but because they understood that one day they would have to. Children began basic physical training at age 6. By 10, they understood tactics and strategy. By 15, they could operate weapon systems, pilot small craft, and survive in hostile environments with minimal equipment. But the Crucible doctrine demanded more than just soldiers. It demanded that every human be capable of doing anything. Poets learned to fight. Farmers learned to command ships. Scientists designed weapons between their research papers. Engineers could switch from building bridges to building fortifications without breaking stride. Every human was a specialist in their chosen field and a generalist in everything else. The idea was simple. If you attacked one part of the Terran Revenue, every single person you encountered would be capable of fighting back. There were no soft targets. There were no civilians in the traditional sense. There were only people who hadn't started fighting yet. The third great project, and the one that would change everything, was technology in the old galaxy. Mike, the Dominion controlled technological development through system of treaties and agreements. The elder species shared certain technologies with each other and with younger species, but always with limitations, always with controls. The result was that galactic technology had been essentially stagnant for thousands of years. Ships were fast, but not too fast. Weapons were powerful, but not too powerful. The Dominion liked it that way. Stagnation meant stability, and stability meant their power was never threatened. Humanity was not part of those treaties. Humanity, as far as the galaxy was concerned, did not exist, and so humanity innovated without limits, without rules, without anyone telling them what was or was not possible. Breakthroughs came one after another, each one building on the last. In the 4th century, Dr. James Tanaka cracked zero-point energy, the ability to draw virtually unlimited power from the quantum vacuum itself. Overnight, every energy problem humanity had ever faced simply vanished. Colonies that had struggled with power for generations suddenly had more energy than they knew what to do with. Manufacturing exploded. Construction accelerated. The impossible became routine. In the 7th century, a team of physicists on the asteroid colony of Haven developed the slipstream drive, the Dominion's faster than light technology was based on warp fields, bending space around a ship to move it faster than light. It was effective but slow by cosmic standards. A Dominion ship could cross the galaxy in about 2 years. The slipstream drive did not bend space, it cut through it. A human ship could cross the same distance in 3 days. To me, in the 12th century, weapons technology took a leap that would have terrified the Dominion if they had known about it. Dr. Lena Vasquez, or an ancestor of the woman who would one day lead humanity's return, developed the resonance cannon. The weapon worked by generating a specific harmonic frequency that destabilized the nuclear fusion process at the core of a star. In theory, a sufficiently powerful resonance cannon could cause a star to go nova. In practice, even a small one could dim a star enough to freeze an entire solar system. The Terran Revency had built a weapon that could kill suns. They built it, tested it on an uninhabited system, confirmed that it worked, and then locked the designs away in Ember's most secure files. It was not a weapon to be used lightly. It was a weapon to be held in reserve, a final argument, a reminder to anyone who might threaten humanity again that the cost of doing so would be unimaginable. By the 30th century, nearly 3,000 years after the fall of Earth, the Terran Revenant was unrecognizable from the desperate refugees who had fled a burning planet. 47 worlds spread across the outer rim formed a hidden empire. connected by slipstream corridors that the Dominion could not detect. 12 billion humans lived on those worlds, a population that had grown slowly and carefully, each generation raised with purpose and discipline. 10,000 warships built inside hollowed-out asteroids and hidden moons waited in silent docks for the order that everyone knew would eventually come, and at the center of it all on New Dawn, the first colony world. In the Remembrance Council met in a chamber carved from the same iron rock that Yara Singh had looked upon 3 millennia ago. The chamber was simple. Round room, a round table, no decorations except for one, a sealed glass case on the table containing a handful of brown earth soil. Fleet Admiral Kyle Vasquez stood before the council. She was tall and lean with dark eyes that held a steady, unblinking focus. She was 112 years old still, young by modern human standards, and she had spent her entire life preparing for this moment. The time has come, she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. Ember has completed its analysis. Dominion is at its weakest point in 8,000 years. Their military has not fought a real war in over 2 millennia. Their fleet is ceremonial. Their soldiers are trained for parades, not battles. Their sensor networks have not been upgraded in centuries because they believe there is no threat. She paused and looked around the table. 24 council members looked back at her. Some were old, some were young. All of them carried the same expression, focused, patient intensity that 3,000 years of the Crucible doctrine had bred into every human alive. We have waited long enough, Vasquez said. Our grandmothers' grandmothers' grandmothers fled Earth in the dark, carrying nothing but dirt and grief and a promise. We are the fulfillment of that promise. Every ship we have built, every weapon we have forged, every child we have raised and trained, all of it has been for this. She placed her hand on the glass case that held the Earth's soil toward I am requesting authorization to begin Operation Reckoning. The vote was unanimous. 24 hands raised without hesitation. 3,000 years of patience, discipline, and preparation had led to this single moment, and not one person in that room had any doubt about what came next. Vasquez nodded. She turned to the communication officer standing by the door. Send the signal to all 47 worlds. She said 2 words. The officer straightened. Yes, Admiral, what words? Vasquez looked at the Earth's soil. One last time, she thought of Yara Singh, who had named this operation 3,000 years ago. She thought of the 7 billion who had died. She thought of the mother who had told her daughter she was going on an adventure. We remember, she said. Within the hour, the signal reached every corner of the Terran Revency. On 47 worlds, 10,000 warships powered up their engines for the first time. 12 billion humans looked up at the sky and knew that the long waiting was over. The Dominion had forgot about humanity. 3,000 years ago, they were about to be reminded. The first thing to disappear was Outpost Valen 12. It was a small station, barely worth mentioning, a monitoring post on the far edge of the Jakari Dominion's territory, staffed by 18 Veloxy technicians whose primary job was to watch empty space and file reports that nobody read. The outpost had been running for 600 years without anything interesting ever happening. The technicians played games, complained about the food, and counted the days until their rotation ended. On a quiet evening in the middle of a shift change, Outpost Valen 12 simply stopped. Transmitting, no distress signal, no explosion detected, no debris on sensors. One moment it was there, a steady green dot on the Dominion's vast monitoring network. The next moment the dot was gone. Senior Monitor Keithall, the Veloxy officer responsible for that sector, noticed the gap in his display. 3 hours later, he ran a diagnostic. Equipment malfunctioned, he decided. These old stations were always breaking down. He filed a maintenance request and went back to his meal. The next day, Outpost Valen 7 went dark, then Valen 3 and Valen 19 simultaneously, then 6 more across the neighboring sector, then 12 more the day after that. By the end of the week, 31 outposts along the Dominion's outer border had vanished. Without a trace, no wreckage, no energy signatures, no bodies, well, just silence where there had been signals. Now people were paying attention. High Arbiter Thalen received the reports in his chambers on Ara Prime, the jewel of the Dominion, a planet of crystal towers and floating gardens that served as the capital of the 12 elder species. He was old even by the standards of the long live Jakari, and he had led the Dominion Council for nearly 2 centuries. He had never fought a war. He had never needed to. The Dominion's power was so absolute, so unquestioned, that the very concept of a military threat had become almost theoretical. He read the reports carefully and then set them aside. Sensor degradation, he said to his aide, a young Jakari named Sean. These outer stations are ancient, have the engineering core schedule replacements. High Orbiter, Sean said carefully. Honor 31 stations in 9 days. The pattern suggests old equipment failing in sequence as old equipment does. Thalen waved a thin, four-fingered hand. Do not look for monsters in the dark, Velen. There is nothing out there. There has not been anything out there for 3,000 years. He was wrong, of course. He was catastrophically, historically, permanently wrong, but he did not know that yet. 100 light-years away, Fleet Admiral Kyle Vasquez stood on the bridge of the TNS Remembrance, the flagship of the Terran Ravensi fleet, and studied the tactical display with quiet satisfaction. The outpost elimination phase was proceeding exactly as Ember had predicted. 31 stations destroyed in 9 days, each one taken out by a single stealth corvette that slipped in. It disabled the station's communications and then dismantled it piece by piece before vanishing back into slipstream. The Dominion hadn't even realized they were under attack. They thought their equipment was breaking down. Vasquez almost smiled. Phase 1 is complete. Admiral reported Captain Dar Akeper, her chief of operations and a direct descendant of the David Akefer who had argued with Yara Singh 3,000 years ago. Unlike his ancestor, Dara never questioned the plan. All outer monitoring stations in sectors 7 through 19 have been neutralized. The Dominion sensor net has a gap approximately 400 light-years wide along their trailing border. They are blind. Good, Vasquez said. Begin phase 2 and we send the Ashwalkers. The Ashwalkers were the Terran Revanks elite special forces, small teams of 6 to 12 operators who specialized in infiltration, intelligence gathering, and surgical strikes. Their name came from the Ash Remembrance ceremony, and each Ash Walker carried a small vial of earth soil on their person at all times. They were the best trained humans alive, capable of operating for months behind enemy lines without support, and they were about to do something that no one in the galaxy had ever attempted. They were going to infiltrate the Dominion from the inside. Over the next 3 months, Ash Walker team slipped through the gap in the sensor net and spread across Dominion space like ghosts. They wore holographic disguises that made them appear as members of various elder species. They spoke the languages perfectly. Ember had spent centuries analyzing intercepted Dominion communications. They moved through Dominion society undetected, gathering intelligence, mapping fleet positions, identifying weaknesses, and most importantly, placing quantum communication devices in key locations throughout the Dominion's infrastructure. When the time came, humanity would not just attack the Dominion, they would shut it down from the inside. But before the attack, there was one more thing Vasquez wanted to do, something that was not strictly necessary from a military standpoint, something that was personal. She wanted them to know. She wanted the Dominion to know who was coming and why. The transmission was sent on a Tuesday. It came from nowhere, or rather it came from everywhere. Monday, the Ashwalkers had placed relay devices across every major communication hub in the Dominion, and at exactly the same moment those devices activated and broadcast a single message on every frequency in every language to every inhabited world in Dominion space. The first part of the message was not words, it was a sound. Specifically, it was a recording made 3,000 years ago by Ember's atmospheric sensors, the sound of wind blowing across the glass, dead surface of Earth. It was a haunting sound, thin, whistling, empty, the sound of a world with no life, no water, no hope. It played for 30 seconds, and across the Dominion, billions of beings stopped what they were doing and listened. Confused, then came the voice. This is Fleet Admiral Vasquez of the Terran Revency, almost speaking to all species of the Jackery Dominion. On Atherime, High Arbiter Thalen dropped his glass of wine. It shattered on the marble floor. He did not notice. 3,000 years ago, your Dominion committed an act of genocide against the people of Earth. You burned our world, you killed our children, you erased our name from the stars. You did this not because we threatened you, not because we harmed you, but because you were afraid of what we might become. In the Veloxy hegemony's capital, Supreme Commander Draxel lunged for his communication console, trying to trace the signal. Every trace came back as nothing. The signal was everywhere and nowhere. It was untraceable. You believed you had succeeded. You closed your files. You forgot us. You slept peacefully for 3,000 years, confident that species 4,217 was dust in memory across the Dominion, in military command centers and government buildings and ordinary homes. Beings of a dozen different species stood frozen, listening to a voice that should not have existed. You were wrong. Vasquez paused when she spoke again. Her voice was quieter, but somehow more terrifying. We survived. We hid in the places you did not bother to look. We grew in the dark where you could not see us. And we built things you cannot imagine. We are not the same species you tried to destroy. We are what you made us. You taught us that the galaxy is cruel and that mercy is a luxury that we cannot afford. We learned that lesson well. Another pause, then simply, "We are awake now. We are coming, and we remember everything." The transmission ended, silence followed, and then across the entire Dominion, chaos erupted. On Athera Prime, the Dominion Council was called into emergency session for the first time in 800 years. Talavine sat at the head of the table, and for the first time in his long life, he looked frightened around him. Representatives of the 12 elder species shouted over each other, their voices a jumble of fear, confusion, and denial. "It is a trick," said Ambassador Krilthar of the Morvathi, a four-armed insect species known for their skepticism. "Some pirate group has found old records and is trying to frighten us." Species 4217 was eliminated, said General Vash of the Jakari military, pulling up ancient files on his data pad. "I have the after-action report right here. Total planetary sterilization confirmed. I heard no survivors detected." "Then who sent that message?" Our demanded. Velen, who had been promoted to senior aide after the outpost disappearances, and who destroyed 31 of our monitoring stations. The room went quiet. Nobody had an answer for that. The answer came 6 days later at the Battle of Valen's Gate. The Valen's Gate system was a strategic choke point, a narrow corridor of navigable space between two dense nebulae that served as the main entry to the Dominion's core territories. From the outer rim, General Varesh taking the human threat seriously despite his skepticism, assembled a war fleet of 800 ships and positioned them at the gate. It was the largest Dominion military mobilization in 2,000 years. 800 warships, each one bristling with weapons that had been the most powerful in the galaxy for millennia, crewed by soldiers who had trained at the finest militaremies in 12 civilizations, backed by a supply chain that spanned 10,000 worlds. The human fleet that appeared at the far end of Valen's Gate numbered 60 ships. General Varesh looked at his tactical display and felt a surge of confidence. "They are brave. I will give them that," he said to his officers. "But 60 ships against 800. This will be a short engagement. All ships advance and engage." 800 Dominion warships surged forward, weapons charging, shields at full power. The Battle of Valen's Gate lasted 11 minutes. In the first minute, the human ships did something that Dominion sensors could not explain. They simply vanished and had not cloaked. Dominion had anti-cloaking technology. They were gone, removed from normal space entirely. Vash's sensors showed empty space where 60 ships had been a moment before. In the second minute, the human ships reappeared, but not where they had been. They materialized inside the Dominion formation, scattered throughout the fleet like seeds thrown into a field. They had used their slipstream drives to perform micro jumps, appearing within weapons range of multiple targets simultaneously. No Dominion ship had ever seen anything move like this. It should not have been possible. In minutes 3 through 7, the human ships opened fire. Their weapons were unlike anything the Dominion had ever encountered. Instead of the particle beams and plasma torpedoes that the galaxy had used for millennia, the human ships fired concentrated gravity pulses, compressed singularities that punched through Dominion shields as if they did not exist, and crushed the holes beneath like aluminum cans. A single hit from a human gravity cannon could destroy a Dominion cruiser. The human Ships did not miss. In minutes 8 through 10, General Varesh tried to coordinate retreat, but his communications were jammed. The quantum devices, the ash walkers had planted months ago, activated, flooding every dominion. Frequency with noise, ships could not talk to each other, captains could not receive orders. The fleet dissolved into individual ships, each one fighting alone, each one dying alone. In minute 11, the last Dominion ship in the formation, Vash's flagship, was struck by 3 gravity pulses simultaneously, with the ship folded inward like a piece of paper being crumpled by an invisible hand. It compressed to a fraction of its original size and then simply ceased to exist. 800 ships destroyed in 11 minutes. The humans had not lost a single vessel, not one ship, not one life. Across the Dominion, the sensor logs from Valen's gate were transmitted, analyzed, and reanalyzed. Military experts studied the footage, frame by frame, trying to understand what had happened. The conclusion was always the same, and it was always terrifying. The technology gap between the Dominion and the humans was not a gap, it was an abyss. The Dominion's weapons could not penetrate human shields. The Dominion shields could not stop human weapons. The Dominion ships could not track human movements, and the Dominion's communications could not function in the presence of human jamming. The species that the galaxy had tried to exterminate 3,000 years ago had not just survived, it had evolved so far beyond the elder species that the comparison was almost absurd. It was like a tribe armed with spears facing an army with aircraft and tanks. The outcome was never in doubt. The only question was how long it would take. On Ethara Prime, High Arbiter Thalen sat alone in his chambers after the news of Valen's gate reached him. His hands were shaking. The report said 800 ships lost, all of them in 11 minutes against 60 human vessels. He pulled up the ancient file on his console. Species 4217. Homo sapiens. The file was 3,000 years old, none, and it contained a single photograph taken during humanity's brief period of contact with the Dominion before the genocide. It showed a human woman, an ambassador, the file said, standing before the Dominion Council, pleading for her species' survival. She was small by Dominion standards, fragile looking, her eyes were wet with tears. The file's final entry, stamped 3,000 years ago, read, "Status eliminated." Palin stared at it for a long time. Then he closed the file and sat in silence, listening to the distant sounds of panic spreading through his capital city. He had inherited a crime committed 3,000 years ago by beings long dead. He had not ordered the destruction of Earth. He had not voted for it. He had not even been born when it happened. But he understood with a clarity that cut through his fear like a blade that none of that mattered. The humans were not coming for him personally. They were coming for the system that had allowed Earth to burn. They were coming for the Dominion itself, and there was nothing, absolutely nothing, that could stop them. In the dark of space, 60 human warships reformed into a perfect formation and turned toward the galactic core. Behind them, the wreckage of 800 Dominion vessels drifted through Valen's gate like leaves on a river. On the bridge of the TNS Remembrance, Admiral Vasquez studied the tactical display with the same quiet focus she brought to everything. Captain Akafor approached her carefully. "Admiral, we are receiving transmissions from multiple Dominion world. Some are military challenges. Some are diplomatic requests. Some are. He hesitated. Some are begging Admiral. Vasquez nodded slowly. She had expected this. The strong would threaten, the weak would plead, and the wise, if there were any wise beings left in the Dominion, would simply get out of the way, ignore the threats, acknowledge the diplomatic requests, and respond to those who are begging with a single message. What message, Admiral? Vasquez looked at the stars on the view screen. Somewhere out there, far behind her, was a dead world that had once been blue and green and full of life. She carried a vial of its soil in her pocket, as every Ash Walker did, as every human officer did, as every child in the Revency learned to do. Tell them the same thing we told them before, she said. We remember everything, and now so. The fleet moved forward. Dominion trembled. When and across the galaxy, for the first time in 3,000 years, the name human was spoken again. Not as a footnote in a history file, marked eliminated, but as a warning, whispered in the halls of power by species who were only now beginning to understand what they had done and what it was going to cost them. The galaxy expected fire, it expected fleets, burning worlds and armies crushing cities, and the kind of total blinding destruction that the Dominion had unleashed on Earth 3,000 years ago. Galaxy expected vengeance in the way it understood vengeance, the strong destroying the weak, the wrong becoming the wrongdoers, the cycle of violence spinning on and on as it always had. The galaxy did not understand humans, not then, not yet. Fleet Admiral Kyle Vasquez sat in the war room of the TNS Remembrance and studied the holographic map of Dominion space. It was vast. 12,000 inhabited worlds spread across a third of the Orion Arm, connected by trade routes and communication networks, and military supply chains that had been running for 50,000 years. On paper, it was the most powerful civilization in the galaxy. On paper, Ember Vasquez said, "Show me their communication network." The map shifted. Thousands of lines appeared, connecting worlds to relay stations, to satellites, to deep space transmitters. It was a web, intricate, ancient, and completely dependent on a series of central relay hubs. Cut the hubs in the web would collapse. How many relay hubs? Vasquez asked. 347 primary hubs, Admiral. If we destroy approximately 120 of them, specifically these ones, 120 points on the map turned red. The Dominion's faster than light communication network will fragment into isolated clusters. No species will be able to coordinate with any other. Military command structures will be severed. Government functions will cease. Time required if we deploy stealth corvettes via slipstream. All 120 targets can be hit simultaneously. Total operational time, 72 hours, including approach, execution, and withdrawal. Vasquez nodded. Do it. This was the beginning of what the Dominion would later call the 72-hour darkness, and it was the most devastating military operation in galactic history, not because of how many it killed, but because of how few. And the Terran Reveni did not destroy the relay hubs with brute force. That would have been wasteful and unnecessary. Instead, stealth corvettes dropped precision charges on each hub, small devices that disrupted the quantum entanglement arrays at the heart of Dominion FTL communication. The hubs did not explode. They simply stopped working, like cutting a nerve. In 72 hours, the Jakari Dominion, a civilization that had ruled the galaxy for 50,000 years, went deaf, mute and blind. The effect was immediate and devastating. On 12,000 worlds, governments lost contact with their capitals. Military commanders could not reach their fleets. Supply convoys did not know where to go. Emergency services could not coordinate. Economies that depended on instant interstellar communication ground to a halt. But the chaos was not random. Vasquez had designed the operation so that the communication clusters that remained intact were specifically chosen to isolate the 12 elder species from each other. The Jakari could still talk to other Jakari worlds. The Veloxi could still reach other Veloxi colonies, but the Jakari could not reach the Voxi, could not reach the Morvathi, and the Marvathi could not reach anyone at all. The Dominion was not just crippled, it was divided. 12 species, 12 fragments, 12 isolated civilizations that had depended on each other for millennia and now suddenly had to face the humans alone. And that was when the Ash Walkers went to work. The infiltration teams that had been living inside the Dominion for months activated their final missions on each of the 12 capital worlds. When Ash Walker teams emerge from hiding and move with surgical precision toward a single objective, the capture of the ruling council of each elder species. On Athera Prime, the Jakari capital, a team of 8 Ash Walkers led by Commander Raza Hadid penetrated the Crystal Citadel, the seat of the Jakari government, through a service tunnel that had not been inspected in 3 centuries. The Citadel security systems designed to repel armies were not prepared for 8 humans who moved like shadows and fought like nightmares. Hadid's team reached the council chamber in 14 minutes. They found High Arbiter Thalen and his 12 senior advisors huddled around a table, trying to reestablish communication with the other species. When the Jakari guards, ceremonial soldiers who had never seen real combat, were neutralized in seconds. Not killed, neutralized. Pressure points, nerve strikes targeted. Sedatives. The Ashwalkers moved through the guards like water through a net. Talavine looked up from his console and saw Commander Hadid standing over him. Hadid was not large by human standards. He was lean and quiet with calm brown eyes and steady hands. He did not look like a conqueror. He looked like a man who had a job to do and intended to do it properly. High Arbiter Thalen Hadid said in perfect Jakari, "I am Commander Raza Hadid of the Terran Revensi. You are under arrest for your government's role in the genocide of Earth. You will not be harmed. You will be given a fair trial. Your rights as defined by your own legal traditions. One will be respected." Thalen stared at him. "You could kill me," he said. His voice was hollow, resigned. "You could kill all of us. You have the power." Hadid shook his head. "Yes, we could, but we will not. We are not you." Similar scenes played out on 11 other worlds over the following days. The Ashwalkers captured the ruling councils of every elder species in the Dominion. In every case, the pattern was the same: precision, restraint, 0 civilian casualties. Military targets were engaged only when they resisted, and even then the force used was the minimum necessary. Soldiers were stunned, not killed. Weapons were disabled, not destroyed. The galaxy watched through fragmented, patchy Communications that slowly came back online as the humans allowed certain channels to reopen, and it did not. Understand, this was not how wars were fought. This was not how victors behaved. Where was the burning? Where was the destruction? Where was they revenge? Admiral Vasquez answered that question in a broadcast that reached every corner of the Dominion, another message transmitted on every frequency, in every language, from every relay. The humans had chosen to reactivate. People of the former Dominion, she said. Her voice was steady and clear, without anger, without triumph. 3,000 years ago, your governments decided that my species should die. They made this decision behind closed doors, without debate, without appeal. 7 billion people were executed for the crime of being different, of growing too fast, of being too human. We could do the same to you. We have the power, we have the weapons, and we have 3,000 years of grief and rage that would justify in the eyes of many a response equal to what was done to us. But we will not. We are not what you tried to make us. We did not survive 3,000 years in the dark to become the same kind of monsters who put us there. We survived to prove that there is a better way. She paused. The galaxy listened. We do not want your worlds. We do not want your tribute. We do not want your submission. What we want is justice. What we want is acknowledgement. What we want is a guarantee that what was done to Earth will never be done to any species again. The terms were broadcast alongside the message. 3 demands. The first, the Jakari Dominion would be dissolved permanently. The treaty structure, the hierarchy, the entire system that allowed 12 species to decide the fate of others, all of it would end. Each species would govern itself independently. No species would hold authority over any other. The second, every species that had participated in or endorsed the genocide of Earth would publicly and formally acknowledge the crime, not in private, not in sealed documents, in open broadcast before the entire galactic community. They would say what they had done, and they would say that it was wrong. The third, monument would be constructed in orbit around Earth, the dead glass Earth that still hung in the Sol system, burned and scarred and lifeless, bearing the name of every human being who had died in the genocide. 7 billion names etched in light, visible from every world in the former Dominion. These were the demands, and for the most part the galaxy accepted them. The Morvathi were the first to comply. Their ambassador, a graying insectoid named Krilthar, the same one who had initially dismissed the human transmission as a trick, stood before a galactic audience and spoke for 40 minutes about what his species had done. He did not make excuses. He did not minimize. He described the vote, the reasoning, the casual ease with which 12 species had decided to murder 7 billion people. We told ourselves it was necessary, he said, his compound eyes glistening with something that looked very much like shame. We told ourselves that they were dangerous, that they would threaten our way of life, but the truth is simpler and uglier than that. We were afraid, and because we were afraid, we killed them all, every last one of them. How? Or so we thought. He paused and looked directly into the broadcast camera, to the humans who survived, who endured, who somehow found the strength to come back. I am sorry. My species is sorry, and I know that sorry is not enough. It will never be enough, but it is all I have. One by one, most of the elder species followed Some were genuine in their remorse. Others were clearly performing, saying the words because they had no choice. Vasquez accepted them all. Sincerity could not be compelled, but the public record could be established. Future generations would know what happened, and they would know that the guilty had been made to answer for it. But one species refused when the Vexi hegemony, the insectoid warrior species that had originally proposed humanity's extermination in the Dominion Council 3,000 years ago, rejected every term. Supreme Commander Drax Thal, the leader of the Veloxi military government, broadcast his own message in response to Vasquez's demands. The Veloxi do not apologize, he said, his mandibles clicking with contempt. The elimination of the humans was correct. It was necessary. The only mistake we made was failing to be thorough enough. We will not bow to a species of vermin that should have stayed dead. He assembled a fleet. It took him weeks. Communication disruption had scattered his forces, but eventually he gathered every warship in existence, 15,000 vessels crewed by soldiers who, unlike the other elder species, and actually trained for real combat, the Veloxi were warriors. They had always been warriors. They were the teeth of the Dominion, the species that carried out the dirty work that the others were too refined to do. They had been the ones who actually fired the weapons that destroyed Earth. They gathered at Ether Prime, the former Dominion capital, now empty of its government, and formed a battle line that stretched across half a solar system. 15,000 warships, each one armed and ready, each one crewed by soldiers who would rather die than surrender. Drax Thal stood on the bridge of his flagship, the hegemony's pride, and waited for the humans to come. He did not wait long. The Terran fleet arrived through slipstream, not the full fleet. Vasquez had decided just a task force of 500 ships, more than enough. They materialized at the edge of the system and formed a loose, almost casual formation. From the Veloxi perspective, it looked contemptuous. 500 against 15,000. The humans were either insane or supremely confident. They were confident. Supreme Commander Drax Thal, Vasquez transmitted, you have rejected the terms of peace. You have assembled a war fleet. I am giving you one final opportunity to stand down. Disband your fleet, accept the terms. Acknowledge the genocide. There does not need to be more death. Draxel's response was to open fire. 15,000 Veloxi warships launched their weapons. Simultaneously, a wall of plasma, missiles, and particle beams that turned the space between the two fleets into a storm of light and energy. The barrage struck the human fleet shields and did nothing. Had absolutely nothing. The shields did not flicker. They did not strain. They absorbed the combined firepower of 15,000 warships as casually as a mountain absorbs the rain. Vasquez watched the barrage hit and dissipate. She felt a distant sadness. She did not want this fight. She had never wanted any fight, but some lessons could only be taught one way. Deploy the Prometheus array, she said. The Prometheus array was not a weapon that destroyed fleets. It was not designed for that. It was designed for something much more terrifying. 5 human ships, specialized vessels that had been hidden in the center of the task force, moved into a pentagonal formation and began to glow. The glow was faint at first, barely visible, but it grew. It spread between the ships like a web of light, forming a structure that pulsed with a rhythm that felt alive, and then the sun changed, the star at the center of the ether system, a stable yellow dwarf that had been burning steadily for 8 billion years flickered. It dimmed for 4 seconds. It lost approximately 10% of its luminosity. The effect was visible to the naked eye from every planet in the system. The sky darkened. Temperatures dropped. Sensors went haywire. 4 seconds, that was all. Then the star returned to normal, as if nothing had happened, but everything had happened in those 4 seconds. Every being in the Athera system understood what the humans were telling them. The resonance cannon could destabilize a star. The humans had just demonstrated that they could, if they chose, extinguish the Voxy sun. They could freeze their worlds, where they could end their entire civilization with a single sustained pulse, and they had chosen not to. They had dimmed the star for 4 seconds, just long enough to deliver a message, not a threat, a demonstration, a reminder: we can do to you what you did to us. We choose not to. On the bridge of the hegemony's pride, Supreme Commander Draxthal stared at the viewscreen. The sky had gone dark. His star, the star his species had orbited for their entire evolutionary history, had faltered. The most fundamental constant in his world, the thing that rose every morning and set every evening, had been made to stutter by a handful of human ships. His mandibles stopped clicking. His officers were silent. The bridge was quiet except for the soft hum of the ship's systems and the distant sound of alarms from the engineering section. When the fluctuation in solar radiation had briefly overwhelmed the power grid, Draxthal stood there for a long time. He was a warrior. He had been born to fight and raised to believe that combat was the highest expression of a species' worth. He had never retreated from anything in his life, but this was not a fight. This had never been a fight. Fight required 2 sides with at least a possibility of victory. What the humans had just demonstrated was that the Vey had no possibility at all, not a small one, not a distant one, none. They could fire every weapon they had, and the human shields would shrug it off, and in return, the humans could turn off their sun. The order to surrender was the hardest thing Draxthal had ever done. He transmitted it on an open channel so his entire fleet could hear it, so the humans could hear it, or so the galaxy could hear it. His voice cracked as he spoke, and he did not try to hide it. All Veloxy vessels stand down, power down, weapons lower, shields. He paused, and when he spoke again, the words sounded like they were being pulled from him by force. We accept the terms. The Veloxy fleet powered down. 15,000 warships went dark, one after another, like stars going out. It took about 20 minutes for all of them to comply. Some captains resisted the order, but their crews overrode them. No one wanted to fight a species that could dim suns. On the bridge of the TNS Remembrance, Admiral Vasquez watched the Veloxy fleet stand down and felt no triumph, no satisfaction, no joy. She felt tired. She felt old. She felt the weight of 3,000 years of grief pressing down on her shoulders like a physical thing. Hung Captain Aher approached her. Admiral, the Veloxy have surrendered. All ships are powering down. The battle, if you can call it that, is over. Vasquez nodded. Transmit the following to all Dominion species: the military phase of Operation Reckoning is concluded. There will be no further combat operations. The Terran Revenancy has achieved its objectives. All species that comply with the stated terms will be left in peace. We are not here to rule, we are here to ensure that what happened to Earth never happens again. She turned away from the view screen and walked to the small table at the back of the bridge where she kept her personal items. Among them was a sealed glass container no larger than her fist, filled with brown soil, earth soil, the same soil that Yara Singh had carried from the vault 3,000 years ago. He passed down through generations of commanders, each one holding it during the moments that mattered most. Vasquez held it now. She held it and thought about 7 billion names. She thought about a planet that had been blue and green and alive and was now black and dead and silent. She thought about the mother who had told her daughter she was going on an adventure. The adventure was almost over. There was one more thing to do, one more place to go, the only place that had ever really mattered. Home. The Sol system was quiet. It had been quiet for 3,000 years. No ships had come here, no probes had scanned it, no one in the galaxy had any reason to visit a dead star system that contained nothing but a handful of barren rocks and the charred remains of a planet that no one remembered, and the Dominion had not even bothered to leave a warning beacon. Earth was not important enough to warn anyone about. It was simply forgotten, like a grave with no marker. Fleet Admiral Cale Vasquez brought the TNS Remembrance through slipstream into the outer reaches of the system, and the first thing she saw on the view screen was Jupiter. It hung in the dark, massive and banded and unchanged, its great red spot still swirling after all these millennia. Jupiter did not care what had happened to the tiny blue world closer to the sun. Jupiter simply continued as it always had. The fleet followed. 200 ships emerged from slipstream behind the flagship, forming a silent procession. This was not a combat formation. There were no weapons charged, no shields raised, no tactical alerts. This was a pilgrimage. Vasquez stood on the bridge and said nothing as the fleet moved inward through the system. They passed Saturn, its ring still gleaming with ice. They passed Mars, which humanity had begun to terraform before the genocide. The early terraforming equipment was still there, scattered across the red surface like abandoned toys, frozen in place by the vacuum and the cold. Vasquez looked at Mars and thought about what it might have been. Then they reached Earth. Bridge crew went silent. Even Ember, the ancient AI who had shepherded humanity through 3,000 years of exile, said nothing. There was nothing to say. Earth was dead. The oceans were gone, completely gone. 3,000 years ago, the Dominion's bombardment had boiled them away. Naka and what had not boiled had evaporated in the centuries that followed as the planet's atmosphere thinned and bled into space, where the Pacific Ocean had once stretched from horizon to horizon. There was now a vast gray basin of dry salt and cracked stone. The continents were fused. Kinetic impacts and antimatter blasts had melted the surface in dozens of places, and the molten rock had flowed and hardened into vast plains of black glass. From orbit, these glass plains caught the sunlight and reflected it back in dull, flat sheets like mirrors laid across a corpse. The atmosphere was thin and toxic. Carbon dioxide, sulfur compounds, trace elements from the bombardment. Not enough to breathe, not enough to sustain life, just enough to carry wind, a thin whistling wind that blew across the dead surface and moved Nothing, because there was nothing left to move. No trees, no grass, no animals. No birds, no insects, no bacteria. Nothing alive, nothing at all, the most complete sterilization of a living world ever recorded. The Dominion had done its work well. Vasquez stood at the view screen and looked down at the grave of her species' birth, and for the first time in her long career she had no orders to give. She had planned every aspect of Operation Reckoning, every battle, every infiltration, every diplomatic move with meticulous precision, but she had not planned for this moment. She had not planned what she would feel when she finally saw Earth. What she felt was grief, not the sharp burning grief of fresh loss, but something deeper, something ancient. Grief that had been passed down through 100 generations. I carried in stories and ceremonies and pinches of brown soil, refined and distilled over 3,000 years until it was as pure and heavy as lead. The grief of a people who had never seen their home, but had never stopped mourning it. Vasquez placed her hand on the glass of the view screen as if she could touch the dead world below. Her fingers left prints on the cold surface. We are here, she said. Quietly, she was not speaking to her crew, she was speaking to the 7 billion who had died. We came back just like we promised. Behind her, Captain Akefer wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Around the bridge, officers stood at their stations and wept without shame. On every ship in the fleet shone the same scene was playing out. Humans looking at Earth for the first time in 3,000 years and feeling the full weight of what had been taken from them. For an hour the fleet orbited in silence. No one spoke, no one needed to. The silence was enough. It was the only appropriate response to a wound this deep. Then Ember spoke. The AI's voice came through the speakers softly, gently, with a warmth that 3,000 years had not diminished. Ember had been built to save humanity, and it had done so. It had guided them through the dark, managed their colonies, coordinated their fleets, and kept the memory of Earth alive when the last living person who had actually walked on Earth's surface had died 29 centuries ago. Ember was in a very real sense the oldest human, not born of flesh, womb, but born of human minds and human hopes, and it carried the grief of Earth in its circuits the same way the humans carried it in their hearts. Admiral Ember said, I have been running models of Earth's current condition for the last several hours. Atmospheric composition, geological stability, radiation levels, soil chemistry, water table analysis. I have compared these readings against the original planetary data stored in my archives from before the destruction. Vasquez turned from the view screen, and the damage is severe, the most severe I have ever calculated for any planetary body. The surface has been effectively sterilized to a depth of approximately 40 m. The oceans are gone. The atmosphere is not breathable. The magnetic field, however, remains intact. The core is still active. The planet is still geologically alive, Admiral, even if biologically it is dead. Ember paused. In 3,000 years Vasquez had never heard the AI pause for dramatic effect. It did not do that. It was not programmed for that, which meant this pause was something else, something real. Admiral, Earth can be healed. It will take time. My models suggest approximately 200 years for a full restoration of a breathable atmosphere, functional water cycle, and basic ecosystem. The genetic samples we have preserved every plant species, every animal species, every microorganism that was stored in the seed ships are sufficient to rebuild the biosphere from the ground up. It will not be the same Earth. It cannot be. Too much has been lost, but it can be a living world. Again, Vasquez closed her eyes. She stood there in the center of the bridge, with her eyes closed and her hands at her sides, and she breathed. For 3,000 years, every human alive had carried the knowledge that Earth was dead. It was the central fact of their existence, the wound that never healed, the absence that defined them. And now this ancient machine, this faithful guardian that had carried them through the dark, was telling her that the wound could be closed, not erased, never erased, but closed. Begin the reclamation, she said, and her voice broke on the last word, and she did not care. The reclamation of Earth became the largest engineering project in human history. Vasquez established a permanent orbital station, reclamation command, and assigned a dedicated fleet of 300 ships to the project. Engineers, biologists, atmospheric scientists, geologists, terraforming specialists from every colony world in the Ravenni volunteered. There were more volunteers than positions. People competed for the privilege of helping to heal the home world they had never seen. The work began at the most basic level, the atmosphere. Giant orbital processors, machines the size of small moons, were placed in orbit around Earth, drawing in the thin toxic air, stripping out the poisons, and pumping back nitrogen and oxygen. It was slow, agonizing work. The atmosphere of a planet is not something that can be rushed. It has to be built layer by layer, molecule by molecule, balanced and rebalanced 1,000 times. While the atmosphere was being rebuilt, teams on the surface began preparing the soil. In the black glass that covered much of the planet was broken up using focused sonic emitters and mixed with organic compounds synthesized from the genetic material in the seed ship archives. Bacteria, the simplest, most ancient forms of Earth life, were introduced first. Hardy microorganisms designed to break down rock, fix nitrogen, and begin the slow process of turning dead stone into living soil. It would take decades before the first plant could grow, decades more before the first animal could survive, but it had begun. For the first time in 3,000 years, something was alive on Earth. While the reclamation proceeded, Vasquez turned her attention to the political future of the galaxy. The Dominion was gone, dissolved as the terms had demanded. The 12 elder species were independent now, each governing itself, each struggling with the upheaval of a galactic order that had been overturned in a matter of months. Some, like the Morvathi, embraced the change. Freed from the rigid hierarchy of the Dominion, they began reforming their societies, opening diplomatic channels with species they had never been allowed to contact before, exploring ideas that the Dominion had suppressed for millennia. They reached out to humanity with genuine goodwill, and humanity responded in kind. Others struggled. The Jakari, who had been at the top of the Dominion hierarchy for 50,000 years, found themselves lost without the structure that had defined their civilization. Their economy faltered, their government fragmented. Some Jakari blamed the humans, others blamed their own ancestors for the genocide that had brought this reckoning upon them, whose civil debates raged across their worlds. The Veloxy retreated into isolation. Draxel resigned his position and disappeared into private life on a remote colony, his people warriors. Without a war, turned inward and began the slow, painful process of building an identity that was not based on violence. It would take them centuries, but they began. And then there were the younger species, the dozens of civilizations that had been under the dominions thumb, too weak or too new to have any say in galactic affairs. For these species, the fall of the Dominion was not a catastrophe, it was a liberation. And they looked at humanity, this impossible, stubborn, terrifying species that had been murdered and had come back from the dead with something very close to awe. Vasquez understood the danger of that awe. She had seen what happened when one species held too much power over others. She had studied the Dominion's history, and she knew that the path from protector to tyrant was short and well-traveled. So the Terran Revenancy did something that no galactic power had ever done before. It gave up its power, not all of it. Humanity kept its fleet, its technology, its colonies. It was not naive, but it restructured its government from the Terran Revenancy into the Terran Conquered, and the Concord's founding charter contained a principle that had never existed in galactic law, the sovereign species doctrine. The doctrine was simple: every species, regardless of its size, its technology, or its age, had the absolute right to exist. No species could be targeted for elimination. No species could be denied the right to develop and grow. No coalition of species, no matter how powerful, could vote to destroy another, and any species that attempted to do so would face the united response of every other civilization in the galaxy. It was the law that should have existed 3,000 years ago. The law that would have saved Earth and now humanity. The species that had suffered most from its absence was the one writing it into existence. Not everyone accepted the conquered immediately. Trust once broken takes generations to rebuild. Some species viewed humanity's restraint as a trick, a temporary kindness that would eventually reveal a hidden blade. Others accepted it grudgingly, watching and waiting for the humans to show their true colors. But as the years passed and the humans did not conquer, did not exploit, yet did not dominate, as they poured their resources into healing their dead world instead of building an empire, the skeptics slowly fell silent. Humanity was doing something the galaxy had never seen. It was choosing deliberately and consistently to be better than the civilization that had tried to destroy it. The Monument of Ashes was completed in the 12th year after the war. It was built in orbit around Earth, a ring of polished black stone 10,000 km in diameter, turning slowly against the stars. On its inner surface, etched in light that would never fade, were 7 billion names. Every human being who had died when Earth was destroyed, names recovered from embers, archives from census data, from medical records, from school enrollment lists, from birth certificates preserved in digital form aboard the seed ships. 7 billion names. It took a ship traveling at orbital speed 4 days to pass them all. From the surface of Earth, even from the dead glass surface, the monument was visible at night, a thin, bright line drawn across the sky like a scar made of stars. Vasquez attended the dedication ceremony. She was old now, even by the standards of enhanced humans, over 130, with silver in her hair and lines around her eyes that had not been there when she stood on the bridge of the remembrance and demanded the Dominion surrender. She had stepped down from military command years ago. The fleet did not need a war admiral in peacetime, and she had no desire to become a politician. She wanted only one thing: to see Earth alive again. She would not live to see it fully restored. She knew that when the 200-year timeline Ember had projected meant that the work would be finished long after she was gone, but she had seen the beginning. She had seen the first bacteria take hold in the newly broken soil. She had seen the first thin wisp of clouds form in the slowly thickening atmosphere. She had seen the first rain, a light gray drizzle that fell on a plain of black glass in what had once been Central Europe, the first rain on Earth in 3,000 years. She had stood in that rain and let it fall on her face and had not bothered to wipe away the tears that mixed with it. That was enough. That was more than she had ever dared to hope. 214 years after the reclamation began, Earth was alive again. The oceans had returned, not as deep as the originals, not yet, but growing. The Pacific was a vast undershallow sea, teeming with algae and simple marine life that would, over centuries, evolve into something richer. The Atlantic was deeper, fed by rivers that now flowed across continents that were slowly turning green. Forests grew where glass plains had been not the same forest. The species were different, drawn from genetic archives and adapted for the new conditions, but forests nonetheless. Trees that reached toward a sky that was blue again, grass that covered the scars of bombardment craters, flowers that bloomed in colors that no human eye had seen on Earth for over 3 millennia. Animals walked the land, birds flew through the air, fish swam in the rivers, insects hummed in the meadows. The biosphere was young and simple, fraction of the complexity that old Earth had possessed, but it was alive, and it was growing to an end. It would become richer with every passing year. People came home. They came from every colony world in the conquered families who had lived on harsh outer rim planets for generations, who had never known anything but iron dust and thin atmospheres and the constant hum of life support systems. They stepped off their transport ships onto green grass under a blue sky with real wind on their faces, and many of them fell to their knees and wept because they had heard about this all their lives but had never believed they would see it. Children were born on Earth for the first time in 3,000 years. They grew up under open skies, drinking water that fell from clouds, eating food that grew from soil. They learned about the genocide in school, and they visited the monument of ashes on field trips and they recited the names of the dead. And they understood in the way that children understand important things deeply and simply, that the world they lived on was a gift that had been earned with unimaginable sacrifice. In the Sahara, which was green now, a vast grassland dotted with young trees and crossed by a river that had not existed 3,000 years ago, an old woman stood alone in a meadow. Her name was Sarah Vasquez. She was the great-great-grand niece of Kel Vasquez, and she was the last living person who had known the admiral personally. She was 287 years old, bent and silver-haired, but clear-eyed, and she had traveled from New Dawn, the first colony world, where she had been born, to Earth because she had made a promise to a dying woman a long time ago. One Kel Vasquez had died at the age of 141 in a small house on Reclamation Command Station with a view of Earth through her window. By then, the planet below had the first hints of green patches of moss and lichen on the broken glass, the earliest signs of the life that would eventually cover the world. She had looked at those green patches every day, and she had smiled. And on the day she died, she had asked her grandniece to do one thing for her. When the grass grows, she had said, stand in it for me. Sarah stood in the grass now. It came up to her waist, tall, green, swaying in the warm wind. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that she had seen in pictures but never in person. Above her, the monument of ashes caught the last light of the day and glowed, a ring of 7 billion names written in fire. Across the darkening sky, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, sealed container. Inside was a handful of brown soil, the same soil or the descendants of the same soil that Yuri Singh had scooped from a planter in Vault Prometheus on the last day of old Earth. It had been passed from hand to hand for 3,000 years, carried across the galaxy and back, held during ceremonies and battles and births and deaths, the most precious substance that humanity possessed. Sarah opened the container. She poured the soil into her palm. She looked at it, just dirt, brown and ordinary, no different from the soil beneath her feet, but it was from before. It was from the world that was. And now she was standing on the world that is. She knelt down and pressed the soil into the earth. She pushed it in with her fingers, mixing the old with the new, letting 3,000 years of memory sink into the ground. The soil of old Earth joined the soil of new Earth, and they became one. She stood up. She brushed her hands on her clothes. She looked at the sky where the first stars were appearing alongside the thin, bright line of the monument, and she said the words that every human knew, the words that had been spoken every year for 3,000 years, the words that Captain Yara Singh had written into the remembrance protocol on the first night of humanity's exile. We were, we are, we will be. The wind carried her voice across the meadow, across the river, across the young forests in the healing mountains, in the slowly filling oceans. It carried it to the ears of the children playing on the banks of the new Saharan River, and to the engineers still working in the orbital stations, and to the ships passing through the solar system on their way to new destinations in a galaxy that was learning slowly and imperfectly to be better than it had been. And somewhere in the quiet data banks of a very old AI, an intelligence that had been awake and watching for 30 centuries, that had guided humanity from the ashes of destruction to the green fields of renewal, that had never once forgotten its purpose. Somewhere in Ember's ancient core, a simple entry was updated. The file read species 4217. Homo sapiens. The old status eliminated was deleted. The new status read returned, and below that, in a line that Ember added on its own without anyone asking, it was a single word that Noah I should have been able to feel, but that this one felt all the same: home.